Now, as I had alluded to earlier, my guests are here in the studio, and we are also live on our Facebook platform at Capi Talk FM. Please do join us there, and let's have a real conversation. Now, my guests joining me this evening in the studio, Jeremiah Bamu, a human rights lawyer, as well as Bishop Joshua Maponga III, a Pan-Africanist.
You had to mention that, innit?
I had to. They might think it's the first or the second. Jeremiah, good evening and welcome along to the conversation.
Good evening, Rumbi, and thank you for having me.
And of course, Bishop, good evening and welcome to
You
the
love the
conversation.
bishop, don't you?
Should I draw
It makes me uncomfortable, innit? Okay, if I'm a bishop, shall we open up with a word of prayer?
Okay, so what shall I... Okay then, so we are joined by Pan-Africanist extraordinaire Joshua Maponga in the studio. Gentlemen, let's get straight into it. I want to start maybe, obviously the legal origins of the death penalty are very clear, you know, if I may put it that way, but I want to maybe start with the cultural perspective. Where does the death penalty come in? Does it have African origins in the way that we, as African people, as Zimbabwean people, used to determine disputes? Or is it a completely foreign aspect? Is there a rooting of the death penalty at all?
It would be nice, actually, to start off by seeing the act itself when it was instituted, so that we can actually have context. And I can promise you that it will not be instituted in 0 BC or 8 or 6 BC. You would find that maybe it's in the 1930s or 1940s or something like that. In the backdrop of the colonial institutions, killing Africans was a hobby. That's why war started. In the ancient times, we did not kill people. If you commit a crime and death was involved, then it was no longer you who have killed a person. It is the entire family. In some certain cases, it's an entire tribe that had killed a person. And then restitution, repayments, you know, the baby girl would be taken together with the head of cattle to go and pay. And look at it. I know it sounds very God for the human rights. I'm happy you're here. You know, so you're sending another person's child, but it was never the child of the person directly have killed. Someone else in the community who has done that. Then you do that. But look at the mystery. Now the family of the deceased and the family that has lost a child have now become blood relatives. The children that will be born from here, they're actually going to the home of the person that killed, and that the relationship was sealed, never to be mentioned again. And it was a way in which we dealt with our crime then. And as a lawyer, maybe you can tell us as to how you're dealing with them now.
Interesting. Jeremiah, come in there in terms of how, you know, the law deems the death penalty. What is its purpose? And where did it come from?
Recorded legal history shows that it began with colonialism, and the first people to be hanged in Zimbabwe were Mbuyane and Sekuru Kabubi. Before then, as the Pan-Africanists has pointed out, we did not have the death penalty. What we now have in the constitution that we adopted in 2018 is a provision that gives Parliament discretion. It says Parliament may pass a law that may introduce the death penalty. So Parliament had a complete discretion on whether to retain it or to abolish it. But what's happening now is that Parliament has introduced a bill to abolish the death penalty. So the only interesting thing I wanted to highlight there is that there was absolute discretion that was given to Parliament. The Constitution does not say Parliament must enact a law. It says Parliament may enact a law.
Interesting indeed. And now looking at where we are, you know, many people say that there are less deterrent ways to deal with crime. That this is about punishment, really, isn't it? From a human rights perspective, Jeremiah, is the death penalty lawful? And is there a place for it in modern law, in modern justice dispensation?
You raise a very interesting question. Let me start by saying the primary purpose of criminal justice is to reform the offender. The person who has done wrong must be shown that what they did is wrong, and they must therefore learn and correct their ways. But you can no longer correct your mistakes if you're dead, if you're killed for the crime. But what makes it more repugnant, if I should say, is that the death penalty has a final effect. So for example, if you're wrongly convicted for a crime and then you're sentenced to death, it can no longer be corrected when evidence comes out that you're actually innocent. So from that angle, it becomes completely Final, yes. So it's not something that we would really want to see.
I wish I'd come here as the opposite, you know. Now it's like we're here in agreement.
Well, you could be. Well, I was hoping you would be in opposition.
And for killing people. No, actually, my contribution would be this dysfunction of such legal frameworks by nature of trying to be kind around a criminal. That Parliament must have discretion. We don't even need that kind of discretion.
So criminals don't deserve mercy.
No, they deserve lots of mercy. But more than mercy, they deserve labor. So if you kill me, for example, there's my wife, there are my children, and the whole world that depends on me. To take you as a criminal and put you in jail and give you 3 meals a day, when now my children are having 1 meal a day, it's not justice. Your family also, that you were looking after in your criminal activities, they're also not having any fair chance. Both families. Actually, where you killed one person, we end up losing 2. Because you have butchered both sides. My own contribution to you as a human rights, take all the murderers out of jail, under government management, hard labor, to look after the families, the wives and the children of the people that they've butchered for the rest of their lives. That's labor for me. You work until you die, not even for your family. You must look after the family of the person that you have destroyed. And as such, they must go to school. You go to work 8 to 5, if need be 18 hours of labor until you work you to death, looking after and paying up for the crimes that you've done. And I think that's restitution, that's reform. And if look at the Rwanda genocide and how they resolved it. Part of the system, that's not all they did, part of what they did was that the people that were involved in the criminal activities are now looking after the families of the people that they butchered. Tell me that country will have crimes of that nature again. Genocide will not happen again. The problem is that criminals are sitting in jail, legs up on the pillows, 3 meals a day, complaining for human rights, and they want warm water, and their bread was too dry. They want more margarine and peanut butter. And how do you reform a system that actually puts cotton gloves on the hand? And I think maybe that's the deterrent. Imagine your own father and brother working for the next 40 years.
Hard labor.
Hard labor. Good job. These engineers and etc. who are murderers, etc. Back to work, Mfana. Back to work.
And you think that will be
your 35,000 you are earning every month? I'm telling you, in less than 6 months you'll confess your sins.
From a human rights perspective, I mean, that almost is the opposite, isn't it? The polar opposite of what human rights are striving to achieve. Is there a conflict there? And obviously there's also the aspect of humane treatment, no torture, and even affording the person who has committed a heinous crime the cotton gloves that Joshua talks about.
No, with Joshua, we only agree that the death penalty must be abolished. But when it comes to treatment of prisoners, we are now, the gloves are now
I think let's take our gloves off, because you take away my rights of existence, and the Constitution wants to protect your rights. What rights do you have after you have become the ultimate subtractor of my existence on earth? What else do you want to have as the remaining criminal on the face of the earth?
How does the law deal with criminals?
The law punishes criminals by taking away their freedom and restricting them from all of the things they used to enjoy when they were free. So they've lost their liberty, and that is punishment enough.
No. It's not punishment enough. What is death enough? In the same breath, your criminal activity of killing someone was final. So as far as your rights are concerned, they must only be determined in the ambit of the Constitution, which I hope you can reform. That I want to categorically state that it is a waste of national resources to take educated people, able-bodied men with legs and hands, and lock them in a prison bar and tell them you can't do anything. We're punishing you by taking away your rights. So sit around and eat and get fat, pump some iron, study for doctorates, and have master's degrees under a prison function sort of thing. So when you take away my rights, I think you forfeit your own rights also.
I think we must first remove this myth that the death penalty is only applied to people who have been convicted of murder. If you are charged with treason, for example, you can be sentenced to death. So there are some other offenses where the death penalty applies. And sometimes because of human error, you are wrongly sentenced to death. You are wrongly convicted of a crime, probably because you did not have a good defense lawyer, probably because you could not explain yourself.
More
clearly.
times than often, actually.
Yes.
So those the guilty ones with a good lawyer, you still walk.
Yes, they'll walk. So that is where I have a problem with the death penalty. Firstly, because it's not only applying to murder. Even if it were applying to murder, it's not looking at the circumstances in which the murder took place. Sometimes it was accidental death. Sometimes it was something that was completely unexpected. Should a person die because another person died without the intention of killing that person?
No, but point loud and clear in terms of intentions. But I'm looking at a person who will commit heinous crimes. Like look at that American boy who gets into school and shoots 45
This
children.
is the issue. I think
For
a
example.
lot of people, if I could come in there, Joshua, have said, for the heinous crime. I can give you an example. A man was raping his daughter. He killed her to conceal the crime by drowning her. She did not drown. He went on to pick up a boulder and bludgeoned her to death. What punishment is fitting for that kind of perpetrator? If you were the judge and you were delivering the sentence,
Firstly, I'll cut his genitals and feed them to the dogs. Because he does not know what it is and how to use it. For a start, that's castration. I might use very, very heinous language, but in my politeness of ministry, maybe we may even pedophiles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What I love also is that while we're having such conversations, we need to be global in thinking and local in application. When you look at countries such as the Middle East and etc., where the Sharia care law functions, even crimes such as theft and etc., can result with you walking around with one arm. We come and the arm is the problem. Oh, we chop it off. You steal again and we chop it off. And let's see how you're going to start stealing. So when it comes to deterrence and how to deter criminals, I would think where crime is very violent, for a showcase where it is blue and white that this has happened, for sending a correct message out there, before abolishing the law, I would send a signal that life is life and death is death. Tooth for tooth, eye for an eye. I think it will send a clear message, because many of the criminals out there would commit the crime, they're no prison. You know, that kind of an attitude, so that even the criminals themselves, when it comes, so the person who has done such a crime, I would, this is more than just a patient, a psychiatric patient, but the intentions are clear, the abuse is quite visible. This person will not need, in my court of law, after castrating him, he will work very hard to make sure that the family that he has destroyed and the life that he has destroyed will be compensated in the most satisfying way to his pain until his death.
So there is an aspect of vengeance and retribution.
It's not vengeance. It's not vengeance. We're just giving you back what you are.
That's vengeance.
That's
isn't it?
vengeance. That's retribution.
I mean, retribution for a crime that you related. For a crime that you related. I told people many times that I'm a criminal waiting to become. And dare these young boys, this is my 2000, come to my house with the trousers halfway below their bums, and I find you standing next to my daughter, next to my bed, I may be arrested. And I'll tell the judge the trousers was already halfway.
Jeremiah, come in there. Yeah, go ahead.
I was about to ask Joshua, do we not say in Shona chitema chizoseva?
Zvakanaka kuti chitema chizosei asi benzi nomunhu unoita zvinhu zvakashata tikasadzivirira. What I love about my cultural space is that the locus of control of Ubuntu was not left to the individual. You are because we are.
Yes.
Therefore, the community assumed that entire crime and took it as their own, even the payment. If you dare, you kill and you carry the cows there, we'll butcher you also. But when innocent people are now coming to pay for your crime, it created a communal sort of space. So, but we actually paid another girl, an innocent girl, was going to pay for that. So in as much as they are looking at it from a Christian perspective, it is the same Bible where we find God saying to the Israelites, go there, kill everyone, the women, the pregnant women, and everyone, kill everyone. And you look around and say, what kind of, if God says vengeance is mine and justice is mine, But the whole Bible is full of divine violence. Not just violence.
Divine violence.
Heinous genocides and violence. Even now, Israel and Palestine are fighting because God loves two children. Here are the Palestinians and here are the Israelis. And he creates land and Palestinians are allowed to live there. He comes to the Israelis and says, "Now go and take that land." Now, how do you as a parent have two kids, you buy one sweet, you give it one child, then you tell the other one, "Go and take that sweet."
It was always meant to be yours. A story for another day.
For another day.
Definitely.
But you can hear,
Story for another
where
day.
I'm coming from. That if we are looking at justice from the divine perspective, it can equally be abusive.
No,
Let's look at legal justice.
Yeah.
Jeremiah, come in there. And particularly this aspect of Munaita Mosha, Akangokara Mujeri. And they're eating 3 meals a day. They're even learning skills, almost as if, the crime that they committed is nothing. That's one way of looking at it. And I think that's what Joshua was saying.
Yeah.
In terms of dealing with the heinous criminal, what justice is adequate? Let's look at the family left behind. Let's look at the indelible mark.
Both families.
Both families, indeed, of the perpetrator and of the victim. And then also considering in the law there are aspects that allow for commuting of sentences. There are aspects that allow for mercy and for people then eventually coming out, amnesty and so on.
There is a theory in law that I think Zimbabwe is not exploring fully. That theory says the punishment must fit the offender as well as be meaningful, or society must be able to say this sentence that has been given to this person is in line with our sense of justice. But now what happens in our courts is that a person is sentenced, it's an issue between the magistrate and the offender. There is no direct relationship to what community's sense of justice might be. So we might need to revise our sentencing guidelines to ensure that they encompass a wide range of sentencing options. You are not just sent to prison, but concurrently with imprisonment, we could include elements of restitution, compensation, the labor that has been speaking of, such that it becomes a blended sentence that adequately measures to the crime that would have been committed.
So is enough, let's come back to the bill in itself, the one that we are talking about this evening. Is enough being done in terms of just abolishing the death penalty? Or do you believe that there's room for more to be done, Jeremiah?
I think there is room for more to be done.
What more could be done?
What the bill simply does, which I agree with, is to remove the injustice and finality of the death penalty. But what it does not address are the sentencing options. How do we make sure that the sentence that is eventually passed correctly meets the offense that has been committed, such that it does not happen again? But the primary purpose is to reform the offender.
I feel slightly sad.
Why is that?
We're having this conversation a few years late. I wish this conversation had been done in the shadow of the liberation struggle. Then we would have been able to deal with the genocide, the criminals of colonialism. Smith lived here until he died. Did not even account for the crimes that we lost uncles, we lost aunties, we lost relatives, blood relatives. If I go there, I may even get emotional. And these people were allowed to walk free. When you look at our crime scenes, poverty, unemployment, and the breeding space of colonization, landlessness and lack of space, and people are becoming violent and all these things, it's not an African designed community that we are living in. We are now dealing with symptoms, as it were. And bearing in mind that it was not there prior to colonization, why would we want to idolize and now pontificate around it and sanitize it so that we can manage? If it was not there, all it means that prior to this, we had a functional community that lived without killing and having to sentence people. We may want the educated people to go back there and find these methods of restitution, rehabilitation, and etc., so that we can restore Zimbabwe to what it used to be. But right now, tiptoeing behind Western colonial democratic legislative frameworks, we may end up finding that countries that started off these things, like Norway, like the Dutchlands, like Sweden, they no longer have prisons. They've converted prisons into training centers. The crime rates have dropped to zero. Their GDPs are through the roof. So is it possible that where the economies are good and people are able to live better, crime of this nature, they actually, it's a good research for another day. So, and yet while we are trying to move towards self-sustenance and self-actualization as Africans, we're butchering each other because we don't want to look at ourselves in the past and restore our culture so that we can find our souls and our spirits. And dare you, the majesty, to say someone must be killed. Tell him to kill that person himself. Because at the end of the day, who is accountable for killing a person? The law or the one who finally plugs the injection or hangs the person? Who kills the person?
It's interesting you say that, Joshua, because the post for hangman has been vacant for the past, what is that, about 15 odd years.
They can't find a man to do it.
They can't find a man or woman to do it.
Why? But the magistrate can hit the table and say, death sentence. You who hits the table, go and do it.
But from an African perspective, say for example, when the job was taken up, the fate of the hangman, how is that dealt with culturally?
The hangman, the one who puts his hands into the water, is the one who comes out with wet hands. So in as much as we can legally speak that the judicial system has permitted you to butcher this person, but ultimately the one who kills a person is the one who kills the person.
I'm executing a death sentence. What do you think, Jeremiah?
Wait, how do I sleep at night knowing that I've just killed 5, 10, 15 people? The magistrate continue watch Okabataro.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
So I was going to ask him two questions.
Yes.
Forgive me. The first question was, prior to colonialism, did we have prisons in Africa? And then the second question is, if you legally execute, I'll
start at the back. The one on the top side, we did not have prisons. We had quarantines, where when you commit a certain crime in a certain place, you pay for it. In some certain cases, you were actually removed from that space. In some certain cases, the families, if there was delay and not enough payback done, families would revenge and clear up that. Wars of the past actually were bred around unresolved crimes of this nature, where violence was practiced and retribution and repayments and reparations were not done correctly. Then in seeking for justice, people would take up spears and start poking each other. So more people would die. So instead of having another 100 people die, people would rather sacrifice one person so that the rest of the community would survive. As far as I'm concerned, that's mine.
So answering your question, I believe that is where we lost that aspect of a communal sense of justice. We adopted horse scale, a system that was left to us by the colonial powers. We did not infuse our own African systems such that our justice delivery mechanisms then blend and are more resonant with what the people want in the country.
So going forward, I mean, we are faced with this, what seems to be a point of you coming together and agreeing in terms of the fact that the death penalty must go, which is good. So we agree on that in this conversation. But in terms of having the law meet the needs that we have as Africans, as Zimbabweans, what are some of the areas of opportunity, starting from this abolition of death penalty going forward? Perhaps let me come to you, Jeremiah, then I'll come to you, Joshua, on that one. What needs to happen?
I think what needs to happen begins with consultation, because the law must exist for the people and it must come from the people. So the people must air their views on what they think our sense of justice should be on particular issues. If parliamentarians are not doing enough by going to the people to consult the people on their views about justice, then the people themselves have an opportunity from the Constitution where they can petition Parliament even to enact certain pieces of law that will accord to what they think should be happening in the circumstances.
I'm so conflicted being a lawyer, but I'm also like, maybe we need to abolish this law. Joshua, what do you think needs to happen?
The communal law, for me, is the best, whereby when you commit a crime, be it treason, be it hideous crimes, be it murder, be it, and maybe the quicker we can come back to Ubuntu, that you have not only exterminated or affected the life directly to the person that you have actually impacted an entire food chain, as it were, or a value chain that revolved around this person, from the mother who gave birth to this person, to the children, to the wife, to the uncles, to the whatever, the entire, and the ripple effect of that is felt throughout the whole family. And to as my learned friend rightfully put it, to isolate the pain of the family and sit it in the bosom of a judge, it can't be fair. It can't be fair. By no means for us to come and sit there and watch you as a judge in your stupid little wig, talking. It's fine. Subsection 5, subsection what? It's according to the. And again, I want to echo this, maybe without being too robust. That's my pain when it comes to our present African governance. And I'm not mentioning this for Zimbabwe only, but it is a scourge around African reformation and revolutionaries who come from the bush to fight the system, and then they come into the office to maintain the system. Now you find all this bunch of laws, immigration laws, mineral laws, crime laws, death laws, Zimra laws, and all these laws that are sitting in indigenous medicine laws that have been sitting and they're being managed by white people because they didn't want Africans to get involved in the business, in the what and not. Our own revolutionaries, our own Mugabes, our own Jitegeres, and own Jitepos, and the Mzendas, and the Nyagumbos, they come from war, and now we're taking over the government. And they go back to sit on the same chair where St. Michael's and St. Michael were sitting on, and they start executing the same law. Here we are, discussing a law that was established during the colonialism. And now we're discussing whether to keep it or not to keep it. But the question is, what was the source and the basis? Nehanda and Kagubi instituted or initiated the death penalty. So who is the Nehanda and Kagubi now? So why maintain a practice that actually comes from a colonial space with the intention of the law not being of restoration, but being of obliterating revolutionaries? So it has no space, even in our spelling, that we can discuss a colonial institution and sanitize it in a democratic state.
Wow. A definitely loaded conversation. Lots of messages coming in from our listeners. The Nubian Queen, Fulaka, is also on the conversation, and she says, abolish Roman Dutch law, Ubuntu is law. Another listener says here, colonialism and genocide were swept under the carpet. So the death penalty should stay as a deterrent. This is what this listener says. Another listener comes in and says, the death penalty shouldn't be abolished. We've got instances where criminals gang rape, rob, and brutally kill victims with actual intent. And they say that it is still necessary for this deterrent to be there. Another listener says, Mr. Maponga, do you think I want to see the person who killed my parents healing? It doesn't help me. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So just a few sentiments coming in from our listeners. We fast run out of time.
I want to say something on that person.
Please come in.
You see, if you don't allow that person to heal, that person has killed you also.
So it's a higher
that person has killed you. You were not like that prior
Yes.
to this. But because the crime has now happened, you now have this permanent hatred and etc., which you did not have. So you have died to love and understanding. And if the person truly has paid for your school fees, paid for your grandchildren, looked after you, and he kneels in front of you and says, I am sorry. Is it not only human that you can look at what they have done prior, what they have done in the now, and wish them a safe travel into the future? How much freedom? Because hatred, you become a prison, and you become the door. And until you learn to remove the door of forgiveness, you and the prisoner remain together.
Wow, what a very different way of looking at it, Jeremiah. Coming in terms of just wrapping up this conversation, what should our citizens understand going forward? Because a lot of them, are split, and they say, listen, this thing should stay. Why are we even talking about this?
So the thinking is that the death penalty deters crime. I was reading research that was carried out by Veritas, and it raises very interesting observations. So, for example, Zimbabwe, when we last held the last execution, let's say from 2005, when there was the moratorium, there is no data that the murder or homicides increased during that period. And then when it comes to the Caribbean has 6 out of 10 regions that have the death penalty. And guess what? In those 6 regions, that's where the highest homicide cases are. In the 4 regions where there is no death penalty, the homicide cases are very low. So there's no correlation between the death penalty and the high deterrence effect.
So you say it must go. It's neither here nor there. Joshua, your parting shot? What do you reckon?
My parting shot is that we need to go back to Ubuntu. I'm running a program right now on my Facebook page, the 42 Laws of My Art. And as of 2 days ago, we were discussing, I have not slain, I have not killed anybody. Because you need to kill yourself first before you can kill another person. And thou shalt not kill. It's not only about physically handling other people. It's your gifts, it's your talents, it's your treasure, it's your time. It's the you part that keeps you alive. And therefore, to stay alive, it means look after you first. Don't commit suicide. Don't kill yourself. And if you start loving you, maybe you start seeing value in other people's lives. And remember, Cain, after he killed Abel, even God said his blood is now talking. So there's a conversation after the funeral.
Indeed, we first run out of time, but gentlemen, allow me to thank you both for opening us up and for a different way to look at this perspective. What I'm taking away from this conversation is lawmakers and policymakers need to design our laws. But they've got to relate to who we are at the core and also serve the purpose, I suppose, that the Constitution puts out. So the bill will be discussed and your views will be asked for as the public. But we have started a conversation this evening, and it does seem that my guests are agreed that the death penalty must go. And what we need to focus on is perhaps a more community-centered way of executing and meting out justice. It's always nice. I never have people agreeing here, so I'm very happy. I've done.
You didn't prepare me. I would have come with my guns blazing.
No, this is part 1. We can have part 2. We absolutely can. Let me thank you, my guests, Joshua Maponga and Jeremiah Bamu, this evening. Thank you so much to our listeners who joined us on our Facebook page and for all of your insights. This has been an episode of The Exchange. Thank you so much. More conversations around the death penalty to follow. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Good night.
Namaste.